Safeguard Our Flank, Part 3, The Battle of the Somme. The Somme offensive was the result of the Chantilly Conference, attended by the Allied commanders on December the 5th, 1915. General Joseph César Joffre, aged 62, was the Allied commander-in-chief. He believed that the autumn offensives in Champagne and Artois were tactical successes, only brought up short by bad weather and lack of ammunition. Prior to the Somme, the Battle of Loos was undertaken by the 47th London and the 15th Scottish Divisions. They had done all that had been expected of them by taking the mining village of Loos. It was then necessary for reserve divisions to be thrust in to strengthen the line, and this was not achieved, and Sir John French paid the price. In early 1916, battles were fought and pressure mounted across the whole northern front. These were planned and executed to take the pressure off the French troops at Verdun, where the German Crown Prince's army had pushed the French back. The main British contribution was to be enacted on the Somme, a battle which was described as the Big Push. Lieutenant General Allenby, the British Third Army commander, and Lieutenant General Snow, its 7th Corps commander, devised their plan for the diversionary attack on Gommecourt. They had it delivered to General Headquarters on the 4th of June 1916. Snow was given the task to pinch out the Gommecourt salient, which had stuck out on the 4th Army's left flank. It was hoped that this would be sufficient diversion to draw German army attention away from the main attack up the main road to Bapaume. The troops allocated to Lieutenant General Snow were the 46th North Midland Division and the 56th London Division, plus detachments of engineers and pioneers. Now this story is about the part played by the London Scottish, and in particular the support battalion, the Kensingtons. Major General Hull, the 56th commander, instructed the Kensingtons commander, Colonel Young, to safeguard our flank. This was to be achieved by digging a connecting trench across no man's land and manning it. This special task was given to Major Cedric Dickens, Young's second-in-command. Cedric Dickens was Charles Dickens' grandson. He was a dedicated territorial who had attended Eton and Trinity Hall and had trained as a solicitor. He was well known and liked, playing a central role in the battalion. His men were in the main office workers and businessmen. It needed somebody of Cedric's standing to be respected and followed. The Territorial Army was an updated version of the Volunteers, and the Volunteers were part-time soldiers paid an hourly rate, exactly the same amount as the regulars. They attended an evening's drill session once a week, shooting at weekends, and undertook a fortnight summer camp every year. This force was raised to defend the country, to be on hand when the country was threatened, and when the regular troops were abroad. Their headquarters and drill hall were built in most large towns, with their members drawn from the local citizenry. They were not expected to serve overseas nor transfer to other units, but in fact did. It was these men, together with the regulars, that made up the British Expeditionary Force. They became known as the Terriers and were considered to be part of the nation's social fabric. The gentlemen were the officers and the players the men. If this sounds rather amateurish and light-hearted, in many respects it was. It could be described as a club where local men met, acted out a soldier's life, and had a drink at the bar. Most regiments and battalions had their own Masonic lodge, which was a further binding institution. Every so often there was a dance, an annual camp, and an outing for the officers and their wives. Weekend shooting at various ranges included Bisley. These were a respected pastime in the battalion's calendar. The sergeants too had their club and bar, as did the men. This volunteer system allowed the government to have a body of men who worked together, were immediately on hand for an emergency, and understood military procedures. The volunteer reserves are an important fabric in the country. Having it in place allowed the government to use it for emergency relief and to back up the police force and other national services. The regular officers were in the main men of the middle classes, conservative in persuasion, although ignorant of political theory. Their pursuits were hunting, playing cricket, and after-dinner games involving horseplay. Talking shop was something just not done. As Alan Chalfont remarks in Montgomery of Alamein, the BEF was an army almost totally irrelevant to the needs of the situation. 5 years before the war broke out, it was obvious to all that Germany was increasing its armed forces to a degree which took it beyond home defence or national security. It became apparent that the German aristocracy and military leaders were flexing their muscles, and that a small incident could explode and turn into war. And this is exactly what happened. Belgium's neutrality was violated, King Albert's appeal to King George was met, and Imperial Britain found itself at war. Now the territorials were needed. Men who had trained on the heath and were led by the nation's professional classes were called to the colours. These men became controlled by an officer class whose previous experience was based on the African wars, where Churchill rode in the last cavalry charge at Omdurman. This was a force not long out of their scarlet uniforms. Throughout the war, neither side really achieved a breakthrough. The last Allied push, which came right at the end of the war in 1918, succeeded only by America's intervention with men and equipment. The introduction of tried and tested massed tank formations did finally reap its just reward. The battle on the Somme was fought right in the middle of the conflict, and you will see how desperate the struggle was and how futile the sacrifices made. There are two accepted methods of defeating a strongly held position. Break through the enemy crust and push out into the country beyond, then circle back and pinch out the enemy's supplies, or by repeated hammer blows smashing all before you on an outward surge. Now both need intelligence and information, but the former needs hands-on direction from the front.